Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's topic, a food safety auditor's observation. Our guest, Roy Costa, Master of Science, M.B.A., Public Health Sanitarian, and consultant with Environ Health Associates. Roy is the founder and owner of the consulting firm Environ Health Associates, Inc. Mr. Costa is a registered professional sanitarian with more than 30 years of environmental health practice in the academic, government, and private sectors. Mr. Costa is a food safety consultant, educator, auditor, and expert with international experience. His dynamic practice specializes in the prevention and control of contaminants that may be transmitted through food, environmental surfaces, and water. He's the author of recognized Internet food safety courses and classroom training programs. His presentations include over 50 technical and scientific papers at local, national, international conferences. He has been quoted in dozens of newspaper articles and his TV and radio appearances. He's also conducting training and research for public agencies in the U.S. and many parts of the world. He's also provided consultations and opinions over 60 legal suits involving disease agents. He's the lead private investigator in national outbreaks of infections due to contaminated peanut butter, pot pies, spinach, and eggs. He also develops HACCP, or Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point Prevention programs, in a wide spectrum of applications, and is experienced in developing and applying food safety technologies. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Arizona in fisheries, and he minors in chemistry and mathematics, and at the Florida Institute of Technology, where his master's degree was in health sciences and management in an M.B.A. He's also completed postgraduate courses in public health at the University of South Florida. I now welcome Roy Costa. He's been a guest to our show before. Roy?
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks for that very in-depth background on myself. I just consider myself a sanitarian. I've been blessed and had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of really important work over the years. And it's just great to be able to talk to you all here about some of the things I'm seeing out there and kind of understand what's going on in the field today.
Well, Roy, I'll have to let you know, and our listeners already know, that you're one of our most listened to contributors to the show. I think it's primarily because you offer pure content in a very concise and usable format.
Thanks, Andy. Well, I hope to keep that going here. I think it's got to be something that everybody's concerned with, the growing problem of outbreaks. And the unfortunate occurrence here just recently with cantaloupe just really reinforces that we have to be doing something, and it's probably something different than what we have been doing.
Well, Roy, it's interesting that you bring that up, the Jensen Farm outbreak. As a result, or in combination with that outbreak, was a very recent, well-known audit, which they scored very highly on in that audit. And the issue is, you have personally audited over 30 food production facilities in the last 90 days. Can you give us a brief rundown of the types of facilities, without naming any facility in particular, but just what types of facilities in those 30, and let us know the wide scope of food production that you've been observing.
Okay, well, this has been a pretty diverse period here with bakeries, red meat plants, and produce. Probably the majority of the work is being done in the produce sector right now. A lot of attention is being paid to the auditing of packing houses, processing plants, and the growing areas. So this has been a very, very active area of work. And
they're still calling you, Roy.
Okay, I'm sorry about that little interruption there. I'm speaking from my office here, so it's liable to be a phone ringing. But anyway, Of course, you see a lot of variation in the way food safety systems are developed. For example, if you're in a USDA red meat plant, you're going to see the USDA thinking about food safety. And if you're in a bakery, you're going to be thinking more about the local Department of Agriculture and their jurisdictions. So underlying this whole area of auditing is the fact that there are laws and rules in place there that we also have to keep up with. A big challenge.
Well, Roy, in that 90-day period, in these 30 food production audits that you've conducted, can you review with us your good observations or the practices that you've seen which were healthy and positive in the way of food safety?
Sure. What we have is a growing commitment, especially among the companies that have been doing food safety for a while, to improve their systems. So on the positive side, we see more application of technology, which is important. A lot of that is in the realm of traceability, where we have some very advanced coding systems now that are integrated with the inventory management system and can produce one step forward, one step back data, literally in seconds or minutes. So a lot of the technology has been there. Some of it has been in the application of antimicrobials and the application of new technologies in terms of UV light and certain pasteurization techniques. So we're growing in that regard, which is a good thing. And then we see more in-house laboratory testing. We see labs being used just in general more to validate processes and also to do end product testing. So on the positive side, I think we had the technology, we had the capability, and we had the commitment amongst most people to be moving forward. But the problem is that the avenues of attack that we see really from the microbial side just are very challenging, and we're sort of doing a bob and weave here trying to avoid them. But we need to have some better understanding of where these problems originate.
Well, Roy, in total fairness, we have to look at the other side of the spectrum. And can you give us a brief overview, again, not with identifying any particular food producer, but in general, what have you seen have been sort of negative type practices in this 90-day foray in the food production arena?
Well, some of the most really remarkable things have occurred during the audits of produce operations. And we're all the way back now, you have to remember, into the primary production here. Unlike in animal husbandry or the raising of farm animals where this type of work has not been done, we are doing the sanitation piece in the growing areas, actually, on the ground, trying to make the ground and the water safe. So unfortunately, I've been seeing contamination of the ground in the form of fecal contamination, fairly regularly. I would say at least 50% of the growing operations I see have identifiable animal intrusion, and maybe 10% of those have the actual fecal matter still observable. But unfortunately, what happens is not only the ground gets contaminated, but surface water gets contaminated. So if they're using any type of pond or ditch or any type of surface water that could impact the plant, we've got a direct means of contamination that exists there. So all the way back, where we are, where I am, back in this early part of the supply chain, you can see where the contamination is coming from. And, you can kind of track it as it moves along to the packing house and the production facilities and the vehicles and everything else as it moves forward to the consumers. So, you get a certain perspective when you're looking at a farm that you don't get when you're looking at a manufacturing plant or a further down the line's production. The problem with the manufacturing sector is a little different. So we get the manufacturing end of it. Now we have a structure, and we have infrastructure. We have water, we have sewer, we have lighting, we have ventilation. We have a lot of things that impact the microbes. So what happens is that very often we see the avenues. I was in a facility about 3 months ago where the folks, when they were unloading the products, had to step into the vehicle. They were wearing rubber boots, but they weren't sanitizing the boots. And they were coming in and out off the production floor into this basic trailer. They're unloading the products by hand onto a line. And, you see this gross contamination issue occurring, and you say to yourself, well, why? And the reason in this case was it was a poorly designed truck, and there was no loading dock, so the only way to get the product off was to get on board. And I don't think this is such an isolated occurrence. We have things like this occurring in this level of the production that really affects everything upstream. So rodent control is a big issue. We still see a lot of evidence of rodents in the environment and occasionally in buildings. And we have operators that are trying their best, but sometimes they're in an environment where their defenses are just not enough. So those are the basic things that we're still seeing kind of on the downside of things.
Well, Roy, that's an excellent summary of the types of challenges that are present and your previous discussion about the good practices, which include new technologies. Can you discuss for a minute why good food production operations improve?
Well, that's a very good question. And I was thinking about this very same issue. And I think what happens is that, first of all, you have to recognize that the hazards are not always there to the same extent. You may have a very high-risk operation where the controls are quite difficult. For example, in a very large egg-laying operation where you may have dozens and dozens of layer houses and millions of birds, that's a very different type of situation than a person who's operating, say, a blueberry packing facility where everything is very on a very small scale and very usually very well designed and very clean operations with little tiny berries. So the scale of things really affects that. But I think the better operations are the ones that have kind of adopted the food safety program very early. These are the early players who came on board with food safety in the 90s or the early 2000s, where it's easier for them to make the jump now between what they've always done in terms of good manufacturing practices and HACCP into the new Global Food Safety Initiative standards. So we still see this really good, solid level of people scoring in the mid to upper 90s. And then these spreads of numbers that are on either side, very few above 95, and really not that many below the 85 that would be considered to be acceptable. So I think overall, we're making progress and things are moving ahead. Some of the challenge, of course, is in the operations that are now sort of just feeling the heat and have to jump on board with systems that have been up and running for many, many years.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Why do poor operations improve at a slower rate?
Well, again, some of the challenges you see in the food world are, number one, language problems, number two, cultural problems, three, turnover. So the workforce itself it can be very volatile in a lot of these operations. And where you have that, where you have a high turnover and just difficulty in communication, you're probably going to see an operation that can't quite control the risk. So you would want to see more active training in an environment like that, but again, often the resources are again stretched, and these folks just have a tough time getting things done and getting them done properly. Then you have the seasonal operations that we see where they don't operate all year. And then we see facilities that for whatever reason were never really properly maintained, and they're older now and they need upgrading. So sometimes it's a combination of things, the age of the facility, the nature of the workforce, elements of production there that really affect that. But what I've seen through the years is that good management can usually cope with those situations and do what's necessary at least to keep a plant in minimal compliance. And as we see in some of these outbreaks, we have some pretty bad news there that minimal compliance was not being met. And if anything can be said about this recent concern about third-party audits and the FDA findings, is we have to ask ourselves, why is there such a gap between those two things?
Well, Roy, let's use your observations as a basis for offering your advice to A, food safety inspectors, and B, the actual food managers, the food safety officers in these facilities. Can you offer your advice to both of those parties?
Sure. You got to look at these folks as a team, and there are respective roles there, of course. From the management side, the facility should be completely conversant with all its policies and procedures and make sure that they're the ones that are actually being applied. Now that sounds like very common sense and something that you would assume would be, but very often it's not a very tight ship. So one of the things that you have to look for, either as an internal auditor or an external auditor, is are the policies and procedures accurate and are they being carried out? Now, if you can get to that level with an audit, you're in a very, very good state because the records are going to be being there, the policies and procedures are going to be followed, and then it's just a matter of detecting where the little glitches are in the operation. So that's the first order of business, and once you get kind of a feel that things are okay, then you tend to see the little tiny things pop up. So one of the things that you'll notice when you're doing audits is, it looks different every time you come through. And that's because the background is continually changing. As you make these changes, you're bringing out other things. And it just takes several years to really sift through them all. And don't be surprised if you think things have been fixed and they keep popping back up. That's a pretty common problem, especially when you're dealing with the human element. Those are things to look for, trends in disciplinary procedure actions, trends in nonconformances in GMP. Of course, you're always going to be aware of the trends in the pest control program and any kind of pasteurization or water processes that might be going on. The real significant things that would be under the HACCP plan really take a lot of scrutiny, and you always want people to demonstrate what they're doing if they're taking a reading or taking a sample. anything that really involves a human being executing something important like that, you always want to be able to check on that and make sure that that's going okay, the test is being run properly, etc. I think it takes a while to really get a risk assessment mentality when you're doing this type of work, but if you do it enough, I think most auditors are going to be able to get to the heart of the matter pretty quick. And the idea being, we have a very limited amount of time to spend doing these jobs as independent auditors. And so we have to be very sort of right to the meat of things right away and not get distracted by small things. And we don't want to miss the elephant in the room, as they say.
Well, Roy, in your observations, do you find there's a strict analogy to food production facilities being a living organism in that they have input, processes, then an output?
Yep. Well, that's really what they are. They're systems. So the inputs, the people, the water, the environment, the air, the equipment, supplies, raw materials, all those things that come into the process affect the safety of the process. So the cleaner we can make that, the less likely it is for the food to become contaminated. So, it is kind of like an input with a process and then an output of the final material. But on the other hand, I like what you're saying there, because Andy, the whole facility kind of acts like as a whole, and when one part isn't working well, it affects other parts. So a lot of attention has to be paid to receiving areas, storage areas, processing areas, to make sure that whole system flows properly and basically is kept healthy.
Well, as you mentioned that, this analogy of food production facilities being a systemized organism, I look back at the Jensen Farm listeria outbreak this last summer. It scored very highly in a recent, very stringent audit. How would you advise auditors in their outgoing responsibility as they examine these facilities in light of the Jensen Farm outbreak?
Well, first of all, I think it's just terribly important that we learn from this. And one of the things that we learned was that equipment that had been used in a previous operation was now installed at Jensen Farms. And what this brings to mind is that auditors, we don't have access to those types of things, histories and approvals of equipment, approvals of facilities for certain types of operations. So we're in a very vulnerable position when it comes to that type of thing. We don't have equipment schedules. We don't have actual approvals for how they're set up very often. Now, in other environments, we do, but at Jensen Farms, that plan approval process, where a regulatory official was overseeing the design of the equipment and its placement and this type of thing, we were quite in the dark on that. Another thing that popped up was the transport truck that took the discarded materials to a cattle farm and then returned to the facility. So now we had a farm vehicle actually parked there at the packing shed. And I don't think most of us, that do this type of work have been asking that question. Just basically assuming that the vehicles that are sitting there are dedicated to that. So auditing has become quite a treacherous field when you start to think of the things that are outside the norm that were occurring here at Jensen Farms. One of the other issues that popped up was that the cantaloupe, in this case, was not being properly pre-cooled. thereby somehow allowing the cantaloupe to condense moisture and collect on the product, influencing the survival and growth of Listeria. Now, I don't think most of us as auditors are going to overlook water dripping down from somewhere onto anything. But, when products produce their own water due to some natural process or to some change in temperature, I don't believe we have really identified that as a risk factor. And it was painfully clear that was something that would have definitely influenced Listeria and its growth. The final thing I'll say about Jensen in terms of the difficulties here is that we have a product, cantaloupe, with a known risk. Most of the outbreaks trace to sliced cantaloupe, processed cantaloupe. But here we have, I think we can clearly say that the entire unit was contaminated. Now, temperature control has always been, well, not always, but since the mid-90s been required for sliced, processed fruits and vegetables, specifically cantaloupe. But there's never been a mention of the refrigeration of the whole cantaloupe and its effect on food safety. And I think that this is true for a lot of products that we might look at in cold storage. We're tending to think of the temperature as a quality concern. And in fact, there may be a food safety concern there, even with whole unprocessed fruits and vegetables. So those are the things that came out, in my mind, that were very, very troublesome about Jensen Farms and about the way we do audits. Not sure I have an answer for it all, Andy, but certainly that part of the work has to change too.
Well, Roy, in your experience, do you find that the owners and managers of food production facilities respond well to food audits in general as an educational tool, or as more of a minimalist type mentality?
Yeah, Andy, the way the industry reacts is really varied. We have some very large concerns that get hundreds and hundreds of these audits throughout their affiliates, throughout their chain, maybe even into the thousands of audits for the very, very largest. So we have a great impact on management. This third-party assessment that's coming from the outside is really trying to integrate itself into the management of the company. In some companies, that's easier to do than others. There is resistance, of course, because the businesses operate in a certain way. And when we come in and we try to change things, we change the dynamics. For example, we can add an awful lot of time to the production of an individual unit by slowing down the processes because we're monitoring them and we're controlling access to certain areas, and we're really slowing things down. And in addition to that, management often finds itself understaffed to begin with, and they have to figure out how to allocate resources to the food safety quality assurance department and still keep production running. So very often you see the food safety folks have sort of been transferred over from some other role, typically from sales and marketing, and from sometimes we have more operational people, perhaps an assistant manager that's been now given that role. So the reaction and how companies respond to these things is really dependent on a lot of stuff. But what I have seen is that most of these companies do make a good faith effort to bring things together when they're required to. And one good thing about the Global Food Safety Initiative systems is that the auditor is required to review the corrective actions and to weigh in on them, as they're submitted by the auditee.
you've given us a great deal to think about today. I would like to close with a recommendation that another professor has given me, and that is that food auditors need to incorporate more microbiological testing in their audit process. Would you agree or disagree with that proposal?
I think it is a part of our tool bag that we don't carry around, Andy. And we have relied to this point on the facility's own testing procedures and equipment and measuring devices to demonstrate to us that they're capable of controlling their processes. So what we would bring to the table would be a verification or a validation of the processes. And I think as long as that would be clear, that we're basically not, well, if you will, reproducing their monitoring results, because we're really wouldn't be trying to do that. We would just be sort of validating the process there. We could have oxidation reduction potential meters, ORP meters. We could have ATP testers. We could have other simple devices to test environments, swab kits, etc. So I think that there is room for that, but we have to make sure that what we're doing isn't sort of giving us erroneous results.
Very good. Roy, in the last few minutes that remain, I was wondering if you could update our audience on your current products and activities. Thanks,
Andy. Well, I have really been specializing in the field of auditing. There's been tremendous demand there. Right now, the business is about 60% auditing and about 40% consulting. The consulting part of it, about half of that has been devoted to the production of food safety programs for companies. So it's a part of my business that I would like to see grow. The demand for audits has been high, so I've spent more time there. But that is one area that I find very rewarding, and I think companies find very rewarding. And the firms that I have worked with have really gained a lot through that type of interaction. The other area is training, especially in HACCP. I do have hazard analysis, critical control point accreditation through the International HACCP Alliance for my courses. They're starting to grow, and those are the two areas that if anybody would like to speak with me about specifically, I would love to speak to them.
So you do have capacity remaining in your firm to service new clients?
It would be pushed back into the auditing. And again, like any small business, there are going to be challenges in figuring out the best paths. Now, I've got some really great clients that I devote a lot of time and effort to. And so it really takes a commitment. It really takes the company and my company working together as a team. So I'm not out there for the world. I'm not out there for everybody, but I am out there for the firms that want to do it right and want to invest that sort of time and commitment in a consultant.
Roy, can you outline for us the types of audits that you conduct? You have mentioned GFSI. How about BRC and some of the other types?
I have not really looked into the other types too closely. I can do ISO 22000, 2005 audits. I can, of course, do the standard Primus audit. And what I have found through the years as well is that many companies will accept from their supplier an audit that's done by a professional individual, even if they don't carry the full weight of an auditing firm. So I've been able to do quite a few audits just on my own and provide folks with that without having to have any particular cover or scheme or standard in mind there.
Well, Roy, I'd like to express my appreciation for your appearance today on the show and allow you your closing remarks.
Well, just let me say that I think we're at a crossroads here with food safety. I think it's very clear that if we don't pick up the pace and start moving in a new direction, that we're going to see more of the same. I'm hopeful that FDA is going to be on the scene soon and be helping us to weed out the really poor facilities that are still out there. But in the meantime, we have to stay on our guard, and I appreciate you being here and listen to what I have to say today and hope to hear back from you.
Thank you very much, Roy, and wish you a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now.